Welcome everybody to this support program for the World Physiotherapy Congress 2021 online. We've developed this program to support our chairs and speakers as we've transitioned to the online event. And this session is specifically designed to support our chairs in key sessions. My name is Tracy Berry and I'm the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of World Physiotherapy with responsibility across all Congress activities. And I've been working closely with my colleague Birgit and the Congress Programme Committee to develop the exciting programme that you are all going to help bring to life in a very few short weeks. I'm joined today by Helen von Dadelsen from Present Potential. Helen worked with our team ahead of the 2019 Congress in Geneva, providing support to our speakers and chairs, and we've adapted that to this online event. It does have a different set of requirements, and we're going to go over quite a bit this evening for the different session formats. We've allocated 60 minutes, but we are finding that probably will go over a little bit with the amount that we're going to cover. So if you can stay, that would be great. It also means we're here to support any individual questions that you have. So you've joined us all with cameras off and you're on mute, but we will encourage you to use the Q&A function. So use the Q&A to submit any questions that you have at any point during this session, and we have built in some specific time to pause for questions. We'd also ask you to use the chat function with any comments that you have. Now, when you use the chat function, it's important to make sure it's pointing to send to everyone rather than just the panel members. So what would be great right now is if you can go and find the chat. Make sure at the bottom of that it's selected to go to everyone, and then perhaps just say hi, where you're from, and what type of session you're going to be chairing during the Congress. We are also recording the session and they are being posted on our website so that you can come back to it also for those who aren't able to join us this time. If you have any problems during this session, if you email info@world.physio, Rach is on standby and she's in the background running the webinar for us as well. So when we talk about key sessions, what are we actually referring to? This covers our focus symposia, the seminars, the workshops, the discussion sessions, and the inspiration sessions. Now, we're going to cover each of these session formats to just give a refresh on them. Hopefully you're familiar with what you're involved with. We'll introduce you to the online platform, which is now live, build in some question time, and then Helen's going to take over and talk about preparing and chairing for your live session. We'll again make sure there's time for questions, and we'll give you a few date reminders at the end. Now, before we start, we just want to have a quick poll to find out how confident you're feeling about chairing at this Congress. So, Rach, if I can ask you just to launch the poll, please, that would be great. And we'll just wait a little bit longer for a few more replies. Great, thank you. So we're a nice niche group, small group this evening, or morning, whatever time zone you're in. So we've got a range of not very confident, okay, and confident. So we're going to ask you the same question at the end, and you'll tell us whether we've done our job in supporting you to prepare for this session. Oops, Daisy, where have we gone? So back to your role as chair. You are in a team with all of these sessions. Nobody is alone, and it's how you all work together. And your role as chair is really important, leading these off. So most chairs have opted to be live, to do their introductions. Occasionally in some of these sessions, the chair may have opted to record their introductions, or they may have a contribution themselves that they're delivering. But generally, in most cases, the chair will provide a short introduction to the speakers. And we really do encourage you to keep this short. The biographies and all the information is available in the platform, and you've got valuable time to concentrate on the content. Now, you will be supported by a moderator that's being provided by World Physiotherapy. They're people that will be going to train up to use the moderation functions, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail. They are all experienced physiotherapists. They're not necessarily topic expertise, but they are bringing the expertise as a physiotherapist to look across the comments and questions to provide support to the chairs and the contributors to the sessions. There is a translation option operating within the platform that people can choose, and that's something called Wordly, and people will be able to select that if they want to listen or follow along in one of 19 different languages. And that facility is available for all of these sessions we've talked about, so it's only not in the networking sessions. So the moderator that I've mentioned is something that we're referring to as the voice of the audience. You can't see who's out there, you can't hear them. So the moderator is going to bring their voice to the discussion. It means whilst you're chairing, you can concentrate on the contributions from your co-presenters and think ahead of any key questions that you want. And the moderator will be filtering and looking through both the chat to make sure nothing's missed, as well as the questions. And those questions are actually open, so the audience can vote them up if there's things of particular interest. But the moderator will be looking across all of them to make sure there's no gem that's missed that's lower down as well. Now, you'll be keeping the session to time as the chair, and everybody knows how much time they've had and how the recordings actually work. But you're also a bit like the conductor and the transitioning between live and recorded content. So depending how your session is structured, you might have some logical breaks. You might have one or two presentations and then come back on live, and you'll be ready to step in and go on with the next piece of content, and then say we're going to a series of recorded presentations again as you move along. Now, that obviously means that as chairs, you need to know how much time is taken out of the session with that recorded content, and that information will come from the presenters in your session, and you will then know how much time you've got for any of your own remarks or the question time. And at the end of the session, you will have those final few comments, thanks to your speakers, closing comments, and direct all the participants to the evaluation option within the platform. We've got a dedicated area on the World Physiotherapy Congress website where these webinars are being recorded, the instructions for chairs are going up as they're being completed, the presentation tips that we've got as well. So I would advise you to keep coming back to that area. So in terms of the platform, hopefully you've all had a chance to log in since it went live last week, and if not, I would really encourage you to familiarise yourself with that. And what I'm showing you here is a mock-up of what it will look like during a live session. So as chair, you want to make sure that your participants have found the comments area. Now, comments is what we refer to as general chit chat. That's where they can write in where they're from, if they've got a particular reflection on what's being said, something resonates. That's different from the question area. And this is where you need to direct people to submit their questions. It's also where, if you're using polls, they will appear and be launched, and the moderator will be doing that for you. You can direct people to the translate button, and this is where they will be able, as I said before, to choose to follow in an alternative language. And then at the end of the session, you need to be encouraging people to evaluate it, because that's really important for everybody that's actually involved. Now, each of the types of sessions have chairs instructions, so this will be coming out and available to you. Now, Alongside that platform, which is the outward facing one, and it's the one that all the participants will see, there is a second platform, which is the one you as participants delivering the sessions, so as chairs and speakers will be a part of. And this is what's also being tested during the technical rehearsals. When you can come in, you will get this experience from the technical team who are delivering this service for us. That's where you can check your sound and your audio. And then during the session, when you're asked to join 30 minutes before the start time, you'll be in this. It's a bit like having a green room. It's your preparation area. But the main thing is to make sure sound, lighting, video are all good. There is a chat function there, which only you and the technical team and the moderator can see. So there's nothing actually going outwards there. So that could be useful as well. So I'll run you through relatively quickly the different types of session formats. So the focus symposia are looking for a good, lively introduction to set the scene. And that could be something that's been pre-recorded, a few symposia chair are doing that, or you will be doing that live. There's then the recordings of the presentations, and we're obviously encouraging as many people to use the in-camera option with image as well. Generally in the focus symposia, these are played one after the other, and then we move to a live question time. So during that time, you'll still be in the background and you'll be able to follow all the presentations, you'll be able to follow questions and yourselves look at comments that are coming in. There will be a smooth transition, I think it's important to say, between the live content and the recorded. Having done some tests with the company, they're a TV production unit, so they're used to managing in this way. So as we've said, the moderator is part of these sessions. They'll bring the questions to the chair and panel. They will make sure the questions are really short, and obviously we're encouraging short, succinct answers as well. So that's something as chair that you need to be focused on to make sure we hear as many voices during the question time as possible. And it is something that's a bit harder to control when you're all working digitally rather than on a platform, and Helen's going to have some advice for that. The moderator will also launch any polls that are set up and display the results. And then you as chair have your closing comments and thanks at the end. Now, a seminar has some similarities, but probably a bit more variation. There could be a bit more switching between recorded and live content, as well as polls, particularly on question time. But essentially the functions are the same. But here we're trying to hear more perhaps from the audience a little bit, and many have been framed around a case study so that it's really focused on the experience of the participants and very relatable. One thing we would say for you as the chair of the seminars, working with your contributors, is to think about the timing of polls. Polls can be very good at getting early engagement from the audience, but also for breaking up and hearing from them at different points during the presentations. Again, the moderator is here to help facilitate that whole interaction with the audience and bring their voice into the discussion. And classically, the chair closes, brings things to an end with some key takeaway messages at the end. Workshops are have been adapted rather from courses. So again, there is variety. Some of them only include one presenter who acts as the chair themselves. Others have 2, 3, maybe 4 people contributing. These might contain one seamless presentation, so there isn't actually anybody live right at the beginning. It could be that the chair or presenter, particularly if they're on their own, has decided just to record and go straight into it before then coming on live for questions at the end. But again, questions and answers and polls can be interspersed. So the teams that have been delivering these have got some flexibility in how they want to deliver it. Moderator is there again to support that interaction with the audience, and the chair closes the session. Now, discussion sessions are obviously a bit different. There's no PowerPoint at all, and this is much more about the people on screen. And we're anticipating at this stage that probably most people stay on screen the whole time. There is the option for the camera team to beam on somebody if they're speaking for a little bit longer, which might be at the beginning, for example, with the chair, but most of the time we want to hear and see diversity of perspectives, and that's something we've talked about with them from the production side. Sorry, I've flicked on too quickly there. So in these, I think the chair really can think about throwing questions out into the audience to try and get some reaction as well. And that can be done through polls or inviting comments, as well as actually inviting questions to be submitted. Think about polls, again, whether they're best served at the beginning or partway through, or something to conclude at the end. Maybe there's something that's been really controversial and you want to conclude with a poll before you get to your final comments. So again, the moderator is here to support. You've got the polls and the chair summing up. The inspiration sessions are much more about an interview style. So the role of the chair here is quite different. You're going to be exploring a topic in more of a storytelling approach to really draw a perspective out of your generally one or possibly two speakers in this session. And they are limited to 25 minutes. So it's giving a very different experience for the audience as well as those delivering it. In these sessions, there is no moderator or question and answer or polls, but chat will be available. With the 25 minutes here, it's really about being inspired by the people that are in front of us delivering the session. But as chair, obviously, you can invite comments. So all of these sessions will be available through the Live Now aspect of the platform, which again, I would encourage you to go away and look at. And then once they've been live, they go into the on-demand area. So that's where all the recordings will sit, and they will be available there for 3 months after the Congress. So you've all received a login. Please do go to the Congress platform and familiarise yourself with it. But at this point, I'm just going to pause and see if there are any questions. So I haven't seen any questions submitted. I don't know if anything's just come up in the chat. Inspiration sounds great. Yeah, we think so too. It's anybody who's been to our sessions before or our congresses, we had the Indaba in Cape Town and we took that to Geneva, and that was our hope. Again, doesn't quite work online, so we're coming up with something a little bit different. Okay, so I don't see any questions there. So Helen, I think I can hand over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. As a chair, how do you want the audience to feel after your session? Do you want them to feel inspired, informed, maybe curious? And your speakers, your panelists, how do you want them to feel after your session? Supported? Proud? Energized? My name is Helen von Dadelson and I am the founder of Present Potential. I provide speaker presentation coaching and training to help people unlock their skills and build their confidence and potential. So now Tracy's explained what is expected of you. How do you get there? Well, today we're going to cover a few elements to help you prepare for your session, which is only 1 month away. So what are we going to cover? First, we're going to cover preparation. This is really important. The more prepared you are, the better your session will be, hands down. The second thing is interaction. As Tracy was explaining, engaging the audience is really important and creates a much more interesting session for everyone, especially in this online space. Thirdly, control. As Tracy described you as a conductor, you do need to control your orchestra, the panelists. So how do you do that? Fourthly, we'll look at virtual setup. So how you set up your camera, your lights, your sound, etc. And finally, I have a few tips on how to present live, which all of you will need to do in your chairing role. So throughout the presentation, I invite you to chat and ask questions, and I will stop periodically to answer them. I also have some specific activities that I'd like you to do along the way. When you registered for this webinar, you answered a question. What do you think is the most challenging thing about chairing a session online? And there were some interesting results that came up. 72% of people who registered for this webinar said that they were worried about the lack of feedback or atmosphere or energy from the audience. That's not surprising. You'll be presenting live into a black hole, essentially, and you can't see much else other than the other panelists. This is challenging, but I have some tips on how to overcome that challenge. The second thing that came up most frequently in your answers was how to keep the session interesting and engaging. And I'm so glad that you want to do that. That means that you know what your role of a chair is, and you'll be focused on ensuring that it is the best experience both for the audience and the speakers. So firstly, how do you get prepared? Can you tell me in the chat if you have been to a World Physiotherapy Congress before? I imagine most of you have. Let us know in the chat if you have attended one of these events before. In terms of preparation, we need to think about a few things. The first one is knowing your session. And luckily, Tracy's already explained a lot about that. I just saw someone has been to several. I thought you wrote 7. I saw it at the corner of my eye. Several, great. I imagine most of you have attended at least one Congress before. So now we know the requirements. We know the timing, the rules of the game, what's expected. If anything is not clear, please ask either today on the webinar or follow up with an email to info@. You need to understand the goal of the session, the framework within which you're working, to make sure that you are delivering what you need to deliver. The other thing you can think about in terms of your session is what else is happening at the same time. Most of your sessions will be running in parallel. And so there might be another session happening at another time, which draws a particular audience. So you can start thinking about that. Who's likely to be attracted to your session rather than another session? And of course, in terms of knowing your session, it is crucial, and I will talk about this later in more depth, to prepare with your other speakers in the planning meeting. Speaking of speakers, that's the other thing you need to be prepared for. Do you know your speakers well enough? Well, hopefully if you're organising a focus symposium, seminar or workshop, you've put that session together and probably handpicked those speakers. So essentially you should know who they are. But do you know what their specialities are? Do you know something interesting or unusual or different about them? That might be handy. Do you know what their key messages are? We've held sessions, webinars like this for all types of speakers, and this is one thing I've stressed in every single session is for them to be really clear on their key message, and even if possible come up with a soundbite like message so that it sticks with the audience. The more familiar you are with those messages, the better you will be as a chair. The final thing that you need to be aware of is your audience. You are there to make sure the session meets their needs. So it's really important to know who'll be watching and what they expect. So in terms of registrations, usually we're hoping for about 3,000 participants to register for the event. What we do know is that we will have all ranges of expertise, all ranges of specialities, all ranges of experience, and from all over the world. What does that mean? That means that you know that you might be speaking to student physios right up to experienced or even retired physiotherapists. It also means that you might be speaking to people who know a lot about your subject and those who are not so familiar. So you need to simplify things and maybe give sometimes a little bit more context. The other thing about being international is that a lot of people are not English mother tongue, and maybe you're in that situation yourself. So Tracy was explaining this fantastic AI interpretation system that you're using, which is great to make the sessions more accessible to more people. But what that also means that you and all the speakers need to slow down. You need to slow down, you need to enunciate, you need to simplify your language as much as possible so that people can understand you, whether or not they are using the interpretation. In terms of being international as well, I imagine some of you, it's a funny time of the day. Here in near Geneva, it's 8:30 at night. Let me know where you're calling from and what time it is there. But what this means is people will be joining at all times of the day and night. So they might be just waking up, they might be in the middle of their day or in the middle of their night, for all we know. They might also be watching the sessions on a big screen, maybe with a group of other physios, or they could be just on the smartphone, maybe watching it during their commute. All of this has an impact on the audience, and the more we can imagine the experience that the audience has, the better we are able to deliver and support them. So before I move on from preparation, what do you need to know that you don't know already? Make a note of any questions that you need answered or things you need to look into further. This could mean you need to follow up to the Secretariat to find out more details about what's expected of you. It might mean that you want to organise an extra session with your speakers or have even a one-on-one with some of them to find out more. You might even ask them to show you, if they've pre-recorded their session, which is due in 3 days' time, if they can share that with you, just so you can watch it in advance. All of these things are possible. In Scotland, Japan, so 4:30 in Japan, 4:30 in the morning in Japan, I think. 2:30 in the afternoon, same time in the Netherlands. Judy, you're on the same time zone as us. Las Vegas, 11:30. You see, so even with this small group, we're quite diverse and it's coming at a different time of our day. So this will be the same situation during the Congress itself. Now, in terms of being prepared, the other thing I want you to think about is that you are part of a team. And this is already what Tracy has said. So you are a conductor. You are the head of this team. And so you want to make sure that the team are working harmoniously together. Remember how Tracy explained how it would look for the audience to see you all on the screen at the same time. Even though you could be anywhere in the world, from the audience's perspective, you are one in the same session. And so the more you can be harmoniously together and complementary, the better the experience will be for the audience. Now, your job is to shine a light on the speakers, to make them shine. I've talked about being a conductor. Another role that I would like you to take is to think of yourself as an old style talk show host, you know, an Oprah Winfrey, where it's not about her so much, but it's about the person that she's speaking to. You will definitely be a more successful chair if you manage to help the speakers shine. So you can use the planning meeting if you haven't already had one, or if you'd like to have another one before the session, the live session, to think critically about the session with your speakers. Make sure you know who's speaking about what their angle is, their argument, their speciality, and be clear on the order. You can discuss with them the way the session will be organized. The more you discuss this, the more you agree, the smoother you will then be able to run it. Remember to prepare the interaction pieces too, and I've got some tips on suggestions of how you can do that. And the other thing is, in terms of the questions from the audience, you may also want to get your speakers and yourself to prepare questions for each of the speakers. Just in case you don't have so many questions from the audience, anyway, it can help to think about what questions might be asked so that you're more ready and your speakers are more ready with the answers they want to give. The other thing that I want to stress with the preparation is the timing. And Tracy already hinted at this, how important it is to keep people on time. So just like the conductor of the audience, you set the pace and you know how long the piece is. It's really important at the planning stage to make sure that you have a very tight running order and you know exactly where things fit. So I understand some of you have already submitted quite a detailed plan. You should be sure that that is the way you want to run it. If you need to change it, do so earlier rather than later. Nothing worse for an event organizer than having changes at the last minute. And what you might find is it's just not possible to change anymore. So this is why we're having these sessions quite early in the process, to make sure you've thought through all the different things, the interactions, the timing, etc., so that you can submit a final version. So what I suggest for the timing is really have a detailed blow by blow of the session. And when you do this, be generous. It always takes longer to transition than we think. And it's much better to build a little bit of wriggle room within there and then to have to cut off the last speaker, which would be terrible, or run out of time for questions, or just rush through the last pieces and not have your summary. That's a real pity. So it's worth going through in detail and making sure you know exactly every minute where you should be. Obviously, you can have a little bit of wriggle room and you don't need to know exactly which questions will be asked, but more or less you should have a detailed plan and agree that with the speakers and communicate it with the speakers in advance. And this is again something that you might want to discuss with your speakers during the planning session to make sure everyone is clear and everyone agrees. Now, the next thing is being engaging. So how do we do this? Well, firstly, it's worth noting how different speaking online is and chairing a session online is compared to in a big conference center. When you went to the World Physiotherapy Congress last time, you probably took time off work or got permission to leave. You probably put your out of office message on for your emails. You possibly took a flight and booked a hotel, etc. And everyone knew you were going to be away. And so you had carved out special time for this event. Now, online is probably not the case for most of the audience. Most people will be trying to squeeze as much of the Congress content in their normal, already busy days. So we need to move things up even further than we would when we're presenting on a stage. The audience may have other things vying for their attention, whether it's children, animals, phones, emails, etc. We need to keep it lively and engaging with more energy and more passion. For some reason, the camera sucks out some of our energy when we're presenting online. So you need to give more. The best session are those that engage the audience. And as Tracy was explaining, there are opportunities for you all to do that. They're creating interactive interludes. So again, with the other panelists, I suggest that you come up with a poll or an activity for the audience. For example, you may want to get their opinion on something. For example, for this session, do you agree that chairing online is more complicated than in person? Write agree or disagree in the chat. That's very clear instructions. It helps the audience be able to contribute to the conversation, and then you can have a look at those answers as they come through. Another example, what out of the 3 options do you usually use in your practice? Do you use approach A, B, or C? And that could be easily a poll. Now, polls are due to be submitted by the 26th of March at the latest. Again, think about what would be a good poll for your session. You could have a particular patient case that you're discussing. You could ask again the audience, how would they approach it? Maybe you could ask at the beginning and then after a discussion at the end and see if opinions have changed. So this is something that we've done in this webinar, where we asked you your confidence levels at the beginning, and we will ask you again at the end and see if there has been a transition through this training. This is a great way of engaging your audience and also getting feedback from them. You may also want to get them to commit to doing something after your session. So as a group, what are the questions that you want to be asking your audience? What do you want them to walk away with? Another couple of questions of how ways that you can engage your panelists. So we've looked at how to engage the audience, but the best sessions also keep a dynamic, moving, engaging interaction between the panelists. First idea is quick fire questions. These are, okay, panelists, I have one question for you. Standing or sitting? Mary, standing. Michael, sitting. Peter, standing, etc. And maybe then that will open up a discussion, because you could say, well, Michael, you said sitting, the other said standing. Can you tell us more? Okay, see how this can work. Another way of quick fire question is to say, in 3 words or less, what is your opinion on this? And you go through again on your panel. So that way you're getting maximum input from all of your panelists in a minimum amount of time, and it really keeps things lively. And this is great to intersperse with longer questions. Another good one is called a paddle quiz. So traditionally, people would hold up their answers on a board. This might be a little bit complicated to organize, but who knows? But another way of doing it is asking for a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Do you love your job? Thumbs up, thumbs down. And again, you can see, and the audience can see, just like that, everyone's opinion, and then you can pick up the conversation from there. They're really, really great fillers and things to change the pace within your sessions. In terms of where you have live and recorded sessions, for example, for the focus symposia, the seminars, and the workshops, one way is to think about, and Tracy alluded to this, thinking about breaking up the recorded and the live things, asking for feedback from the audience, or as you finish a recording, you could comment and give your own feedback or summary of the pre-recorded session. You need to plan carefully to make sure these transitions are as smooth as possible and to keep up the energy and engagement. For the discussion sessions, you probably want to make sure that you are getting everyone's input and thereby limiting the time that people respond to each of the questions. So you could agree that each panelist can only intervene for 2 minutes at a time. And then, of course, after a nice, concise answer to your question from a panelist, you could ask for more details, or another speaker could ask for more details, and then that could be expanded on. But this will enable people to change from one panelist to another and keep it moving, rather than end up with a long monologue from one person sort of hogging the microphone, as to say. And quick fire questions, for example, can help break up that longer answer with a shorter answer. For inspiration sessions, you have probably a longer time with just 1 or 2 panelists, and we're looking for more an interview style. Now, I imagine the speaker is an expert and could speak for much more than 25 minutes on their subject or on themselves. However, it's much more interesting for the audience if this is broken up by probing questions by you as the chair. So we're not looking for a lecture, we're really looking for a narrative or a story that can be teased out by the chair. So again, you have to work closely with your panelist or panelists to prepare that. So there are a few tips on interactive, both with the audience and with the panelists. Can you tell me now which element might work well in your session? Maybe you like the idea of the quickfire question or the paddle quiz. Polls we've already mentioned a few times. Have a think about what would work well in your session and when would it work best. So Rudy has said polls, great. If you can change your to in the comment form to all panelists and attendees, then all of the participants can see your answers at the same time. Polls would be good. Polls are great. They're prepared in advance. They help take the temperature of the audience, get feedback, give you some material to work with afterwards. Remember, you have to submit your polls to the Secretariat by the 26th of March. Can be beginning, mid, end. Polls work at any time. Again, it's to wake people up and to get them involved. Okay, have a think about what might work in your session particularly. And again, go to your speakers. We've talked about interactive elements with your speakers during these trainings, so I'm sure they'll have some great ideas of how to keep the session engaging as well. The next thing I wanted to touch on was control. Yes, you are the conductor, as we said, so you need to control the pace. You need to control when the flute comes in or the double bass. Okay, so this is your control. Now, a couple of elements here which are really important. The opening and the closing. And then we'll talk a little bit about the challenging situations as well. So firstly, the opening. For many of your sessions, you are probably the first person that the audience hears and sees. So you set the mood. You want to be full of energy, be positive, and grab the attention of the audience right from the beginning. You might want to ask a rhetorical question to the audience, give an interesting fact or a fascinating statistic to get people starting to think. As we said, you could also run a poll right at the beginning. You will also have the opportunity, much of the time, to introduce the speakers. And this is a nice thing to do in a generic way at the beginning of your session. So you can give what you want to leave the audience with is an impression that these are people that should be listened to. You need to highlight only the top end things about your speakers, the range of speakers that you have to set them up for success. Remember that the audience has access to full bios on the Congress website. So you don't need to go into a lot of detail, but just pick up a few interesting facts that are relevant that will keep the audience engaged. The other thing you can do in the opening is to explain the value of your topic to the audience themselves and also to the Congress at large. Why should they pay attention? In this session, you will learn or hear about expert opinions on etc., etc. The opening is really important. It should be short, it should be tight, and it's worth actually writing down and memorizing if you're not doing a pre-recorded opening. You need to practice it. You need to deliver it with conviction to get the session off to the right start, to engage your audience and to set your speakers up for success. There are a couple of other things that Tracy explained in terms of controlling the session as well. And it's probably something you want to do just at the end of your opening, explaining to people where they can comment, where they can ask questions, where the interpretation button is, and also at the end of the session, maybe how to evaluate the session. All of this is part of your control role. In terms of closing, so that's also really important. It's all very well to have an amazing, well-crafted opening and a great session, and then it sort of tapers off at the end. It's a real pity. You want to leave the audience with a clear message and a strong closing. One idea is to have a 3-point summary of the session, or to highlight from each of the speaker. You want to give equal praise and attention to each speaker and leave the audience with a takeaway, a golden nugget of information or insight, or maybe a challenge. You could also leave them with that. Next time when you have this situation, try this way of dealing with it, for example. Again, you should prepare this closing in advance. It doesn't need to be long and involved, but it should make sure that you cover all the points that you want to and leave the last sentence to be as strong as you can for the audience to finish going, wow, that was a great use of my time watching that session. What a professional onto it chair they had there. The last thing about the taking control is to be clear with your instructions. Now, I've seen this done very well and also not very well, and it's particular for the online space. You want to be clear whenever you hand to another panelist or ask the audience to do anything. Otherwise, you can waste time. People are confused what they're supposed to do. So, for example, instead of opening a question to all of the panelists and then people unmuting themselves and starting to talk over each other, so instead of saying, maybe someone from the panel wants to answer this question, you should be specific. Jenny, could you please give your ideas on that? Or I'd love to hear from you now, Matthew. Be specific so they know exactly who should be answering, who should be unmuting themselves, and who should be preparing the answer. Same thing for the audience. What do you want them to do? Are you asking them to think to themselves, to answer in the chat, to answer a poll, to do an activity on their own? Maybe we're doing a stretching exercise. Tell them in advance that you're going to do this, and then you tell them specifically what you want them to do. So for example, in a minute, we're going to open the floor to questions. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function. While we are receiving the questions, I have a quick fire question for the panelists. So that gives a nice space for the audience to prepare their questions, to write them out if they need to. And in the meantime, instead of that awkward lull in conversation or sort of looking at your watch, there is still value that you're giving from doing this quick fire question to the panelists, for example. You may want to write these instructions down to help you, because in the moment you can get quite nervous and you can fumble your words or forget what you're trying to say. So you can, again, have, if you need, a little cheat sheet. So for example, I have one here. Luckily now after writing this out, I actually know what they are, but this is my cheat sheet to show what the different sessions are and the key elements of them, because when we started preparing these sessions, I kept forgetting. So I have that ready. I don't need to glance at it very often, but it's there as a crutch in case I do. Now, you don't see that as a participant unless I choose to show it to you. You can do the same with your setup to make sure you have something to refer to if you need to. The other thing in terms of control, the last thing is we talked about keeping an eye on the time. There could be a situation where one of your speakers speaks on and on and on and on. Hopefully they won't, because we've trained them well, but you never know. They might get so enthusiastic about the question that you've asked them, or the audience has asked, that they just cannot help themselves. You need to work out how you're going to stop them politely in a professional way. So you should agree with your other speakers what way they would like to be stopped. Now, you do have a separate chat that you can have with them, but chances are, as they're speaking about this passion that they have, they're unlikely to be reading a chat coming up. So you probably need to give them a visual clue. So whether it's a simple finger, or you could hold up a different colored card. And someone said today, maybe you could have a ribbon. The sign is wrap it up. Something like that would be a nice, simple reminder for the speaker to, oh, yes, I'm going over time, and wrap up, rather than you having to sort of cut them off, cut their microphone off, which we don't want. The other situation that you might need to figure out in advance how to deal with is if one of the panelists wants to intervene, or maybe as a chair you want to intervene. Again, we won't always see the chat while we're engaged in your engaging session. So maybe you want to agree that a simple hand up shows that I want to speak, if possible, next. But you need to agree that in advance and then take that control. I'm just going to pause there and check if there are any questions or comments so far. Great, so Cindy suggested that in her session, she's going to have poll questions in between the pre-recorded presentations. Great, but for the Q&A sessions, I like to make it a little lively with the short questions. Yeah, really good. So again, it's the same as if you're putting any TV show together, you need to break things up so we don't have long periods of just one pace. So if you can change the pace, then that's a great thing to be doing. We will answer Cindy's question at the end about polls as well. It's a technical question. Great. So hopefully that's given you some ideas of how to control the session, of how to create interactive, engaging elements into your session, and a little bit more about your role as a chair. Now, because we are speaking online, not only do you need to think about looking after your speakers and preparing all of this, but you also have to technically set yourself up correctly. So how do you do this? Well, it's worth thinking about now, even though it's a while away, because you might need to change your normal setup, and I'll tell you why. You are basically now a TV presenter or host. So people expect you to look good, to be set up professionally. And this is also going to help you feel more confident and come across more professionally. How do we do this? There are a couple of elements. The first and most important, I think, is the camera. Now, I'm sure you have all seen people presenting like this, right? You see at my nostrils. Hopefully they're quite clean this evening. It's fine. It comes from where a laptop would usually be if I was working on it. But if we manage to lift the camera up to just above eye height and have it straight on, we get a much better view and we can see your facial expressions much better. So that may mean that you need to prop your laptop up on a box or a set of books, or if you want to be standing when you're presenting, maybe on a shelf or a table or something like that. Make sure your camera is at eye height and straight on. The next thing that you need to think about is lighting. It's all very well to have yourself perfectly set up with the camera, but if there is no lighting, people will not see your facial expression. See, this is a light that I have naturally from my screen and my laptop and my overhead light. However, I think you'll agree that when I put on my proper lights, you can see me better. It's a more even light on my face. So how do you do this? Well, you may want to find additional lighting to set behind your camera. You want to put it behind your camera rather than behind yourself, because if you put it behind yourself, you will create a silhouette, you will be in shadow, and people will be less able to see your facial expressions and your eyes. So the next thing you want to think about is sound. Even if you have a beautiful setup, if people can't hear you or there's too much background noise, again, it won't work. So most modern laptops have a decent microphone in them, but you may want to, for your session, actually use headphones, either over the ear or in the ear headphones, to minimize external background noise. Again, it's worth seeing what you've got available and what works best for you. With the microphone and the camera, it might also be worth asking around friends and family and colleagues if anyone has a better piece of equipment. You don't have to do this, but if you have a better quality microphone at your disposal, it does make a difference to the sound quality. And it's worth asking around to see if you can borrow one for half a day. The next thing you want to do is think about your background. So whether you are sitting or standing, what we're looking for in the background is a neutral, uncluttered space. Ideally, you don't use a virtual background because, unfortunately, I'm sure you've seen it, In the virtual background, you can float in and out of the image, and that can be very off-putting. And also sometimes you can see a giant hand come out of nowhere, and that's quite distracting for the audience. So ideally, no virtual background. You find a neutral, basic space, a flat wall behind you, or a tidy shelves or something like that behind you. Now, you can stand, as I said before, or sit. Standing is great, as you know, as physiotherapists, for your energy and for the blood flow and your oxygen, etc. But you need to feel comfortable, and you may need to then adjust your setup accordingly. I can't do my presentation standing here because I have sloping roofs, and it just does not give me enough space. If you do choose to sit, you probably want to sit on the edge of your seat, which gives you better breath and control. And also with your feet grounded, it feels like you're almost standing, and you're more likely to be more energetic than sitting back and sort of slumping in your chair. The final thing is, what are you going to wear? Now, it's like any other congress you're attending. You can basically wear what you like. You can wear a suit and tie, gentlemen, if you feel comfortable. If you don't wear them. Most important is to feel comfortable and look professional. You are welcome to wear traditional costumes as well, but the important thing to remember is that block colors work better than busy patterns. So again, another thing you should think about. So before we move on, I want you to take a minute to write down, just for yourself, what needs to change in terms of your technical setup. Maybe you need to find a different place to take your session because of the internet connection, because of the lighting, because of you want to stand up, for example. Maybe you want to ask around and see if you can find a better quality microphone or camera. Or perhaps you want to get your bedside lamp involved in your setup because you need additional lighting. Have you scheduled time in your diary to practice? This is something that many people overlook, especially chairs, because they think, I don't do a presentation, I'm just facilitating, I don't need to practice. If you practice those smooth transitions of looking into the camera with the setup, you will do a much better job on the day. Maybe you need to ask a friend or a colleague to help you. What do you need to change? Make a note of it so that you don't forget to follow up after this training. Before I move on, I want to see if there are any questions on the virtual setup. You will have a technical rehearsal, as Tracy explained, and that's to see what the speaker platform looks like and where all the different buttons are, as well as before your session to check your lighting, your sound, and the camera setup. Don't see any questions specifically about that. Happy to, again, stay online a little bit later to answer any final questions on that. Again, just don't leave it to the last minute. It's worth thinking about now to make sure that you have the optimum setup. My final part is about virtual presenting, live presenting. We have, you know, the session, everyone's prepared, you have your optimum setup. Now, what do you want to do when you're live presenting? Well, firstly, recognize that people want to see people, and you are now the TV host. You will be seen by the audience, and you want to look interesting and sound interesting while they're looking at you. So the first thing is to practice speaking to camera. That little black hole is your eye contact. It takes practice to speak into the camera instead of looking at your notes or looking at the other presenters. So you'll see I make a big effort to speak to the camera through my trainings, because I think that if I'm doing it like this, you will get bored. You won't feel like I'm talking to you. And it's much more powerful if I look straight down the lens and speak directly to you. It takes practice. You have a month to practice on all your online calls and meetings. Try to practice looking into the camera and see how that feels. You may want to put a soft toy behind your camera or an arrow pointing to it to remind you. The other thing is to remember that when you're not speaking, you will be on camera most of the time. So the worst thing would be to say, and now we have our next speaker who's going to speak about blah, blah, blah. Or, okay, you're on show. Imagine yourself to be on the stage like you would at the conference center for that entire session. Be engaged, continue to look at the camera, smile, nod, look like you're interested in what your speakers are saying. It sounds funny, but I have seen many presenters finish their piece and then sort of switch off. And it's awful for the audience and the other panelists for this to happen. The other thing I've already noted is the use of notes. There are some things that you may want to refer to. Prepare them well in advance. Make sure they're nice big text so you can glance at them. Use different colors if you need to. And you can just keep them out of sight of the audience, to the side or down underneath. And when you need to, you can refer to them. There's no shame in that. Everybody does it. It can be necessary. We can't remember absolutely everything all the time. And the final thing, I've already said it before, practice. Practice until you're comfortable with this technical setup. Practice your content. Practice those transitions from the pre-recorded to the live elements. Practice giving clear instructions to your audience or to the panelists. And practice keeping your energy up and your enthusiasm, and you will be a fantastic chair. Now, before I hand back to Tracy, I asked you a question at the beginning of this session. I don't know if you remember. How will you ensure that your audience and speakers feel the way you want them to feel after your session? I asked you at the beginning, how do you want your audience to feel and how do you want your speakers to feel? Do you want your audience to feel inspired, informed? Do you want your speakers to feel energized and supported? What have you learned from this training? What one thing will you do differently to make sure that you are achieving your aim of making your audience feel or think or do the way you want them to? The same for the speakers, as in the end, you're there to support both the audience and the speaker. What have you learned? What are you going to do differently? What are you going to stop doing maybe, or start doing, or try for this session? What's your biggest takeaway? Let us know in the chat. Engaging the audience. Great. Thanks, Jennifer. I hope I gave you some suggestions that you can take away and think about a little bit further. Using polls, quick fire questions. Make transition energetic. Yes. Stay attached to the camera. Absolutely. Include more interaction. Great. Yes. It's challenging for us all to go online as a presenter, a chair, the organizers and the audience. The more we can get that connection, the interaction, the energy, the better the session and the experience will be for everyone. Plan questions for speakers. Yes, Heather, great. They have been asked to prepare questions for themselves so that they are ready. So if you can have that discussion with your panelists, you'll be really ready for the session. I think I can hand it back to you now, Tracy.
Many thanks, Helen. So I think looking across the questions and some of the comments, polls is a big thing that's actually coming up, and in terms of the session schedules as well. So you all had to complete for your sessions a session template which had the run order, advice on who had presentations, who didn't, and that's been submitted. And you were asked for comments around whether you were going to be using polls with details to follow. So you can then send that information through to us at the team with exactly what the poll questions are and where you want them to appear in the run order, and then we will put that into the running order and you'll get a final copy come back as well. So if you've already sort of thought about where you want it and you need to change it, again, just let us know. So what you obviously can't do is break up an individual recording and stop it to put a poll in. It's a complete recording. You could do a poll, you could go to the next recording, which might be different from your initial thoughts now having had this training. So we'll work with you on that. So let me just check on the other questions. So in terms of what the technicians will know is we're working with a TV production company, and Helen's often referred to this as a TV show. You don't have to do anything with regard to sharing screens, pressing any buttons to switch between live or recorded content. That's all being done for you. They're professionals, they know what they're doing, they've worked with us, they will have all the run sheets, and they will work through all of that, the transitions, and they will do the camera fades to come back so it's not sort of clunky or stop-start. So we can do polls at the beginning or end of presentations. So not within the live, Heather. So what I would say is you can run your poll live. So you as the chair introduce it, or one of your speakers does that. You ask the moderator to share the poll and the results, and then you can say, right, we're now going to the presentation. Yep, that's right. So you can run a poll during the live session itself, not intersperse within a recorded presentation, correct? So I think there was another question further up if I go back and have a look. So can we change the time of the technical rehearsal? So you've all had letters. We've tried to work across all the time zones to minimize that. If you do need to change it, we do understand that. So just respond to the email with your technical rehearsal, and Tash on our team will see if she can slot into another one. It's not critical you're on the same one as the other presenters in your session because it's not running through it. It's going through the technical aspects. And do you need to log in 30 minutes in advance of the session? Yes, please. So don't leave it to the last minute. The 30 minutes will go quite quickly. You might be sitting there and it's all fine because everybody's sound, audio, lighting is fine, and that's fine. You can just prepare and chat amongst yourselves. The technical team will be there just to make sure everything is running. It's a bit like having the green room for a TV show, so that you're ready for the minute that it goes live. Any problems at that time, the technical team also have mobile numbers, so they will be trying to track down people. And also as chairs, our guidance is to have a backup person within your team. So if you're in a focus symposium or a seminar, think about somebody else who's really prepared, who could step into your shoes if your whole internet goes down or something does happen. We will also have a few people on standby, hopefully, who could step in, but it's much better if it's somebody who comes from your session. Any other questions that I've missed? Yes. Okay, so I think that's everything around the polls and the questions. Heather, hopefully that's picked up on yours. Cindy, I know you had a few. Helen, did you spot any others I haven't addressed?
No, I just answered one from Heather. She's saying, could she put the polls between the recorded presentations, for example, in the seminar? Yes, you can, as long as the technical team knows in advance and your polls are submitted before the 26th of March.
Great, thank you. So on that note, I think that moves us to a concluding slide with key date reminders. So the 1st of March, everybody had their notifications, and we really appreciate how flexible people have been and how understanding that we're working across time zones, as illustrated by your comments at the start of this session. We've got one session, I think, with 17 hours difference in terms of somebody's start time and end time. So it's been an interesting jigsaw to try and make it work and be as accommodating as we can be across the time zones. The platform's live. Do go and take a look and start planning your own time within the Congress. The 15th to the 29th of March is when all the technical rehearsals are. So if you have got a problem, do please follow up. Obviously, if you can accommodate it, it's far better just because of the amount that we're trying to fit in. The 26th of March, as Helen just reminded you, is the deadline for submitting your poll questions to us. So that's the question, the possible answers, and where it needs to go in your timing sheet in the schedule. 31st of March, we lift the embargo on the abstracts in the platform, and then you're joining us all live between the 9th and the 11th of April. That's also when all the on-demand content will be there, and then your live sessions recorded get added to that. And that will all be available for 3 months after the Congress. So as we finish, we would just like to run our own poll again. So Rachel, if I could ask you to pop that up. We just wanted to ask you again where your confidence levels were having gone through this session today. So if we can just complete that, and then we'll share the results in a moment. Okay, if we close the poll, thanks Rachel, we'll share the results. So that's really good. I'm pleased to see that we've lifted those from not very confident up, and we've nudged into the very confident. So I think that's a positive outcome, and hopefully with time to reflect, your confidence will also grow again. So I'll just stop sharing. That's great. Okay, so I think, Helen, between us, we've covered everything we planned to cover this evening. What we want is for all of you to have a really positive experience, and it's great to see how much you've taken on board with the messages this evening. If you have got further questions, do please follow up with us at World Physiotherapy. We know the success of the Congress comes back to the contributions of so many people, and you are really critical to that. So thank you very much for everything you're doing to help us deliver a really positive experience, bringing our community together next month. And we very much look forward to seeing you all online. So thank you to Helen from Present Potential for working with us over the course of this webinar series, and to Rach in the team, who you haven't seen on camera, but she's there running things in the background. Enjoy the rest of your day, evening, whatever the time may be. Go back to our website where the recordings will be and further information. But as I say, we're here to support you. So do please come back to us if you have any additional questions. Thanks, everybody.